Hi everybody, my name is Walter Hoye and I'm here with my wife Lori, who's actually holding the camera in her hand. She's our official videographer. And I'm here with Steve Ptomey. He's park ranger here at the Allensworth State Historic Park. And he's going to tell us a little bit about Colonel Allen Allensworth, one of my favorite figures in Black history. Steve, it's great to be here. I'm glad you've actually agreed to do this. So please tell us a little bit about the Colonel.
Sure. The Colonel was born in 1842, born a slave. He was born in Louisville, Kentucky. He was later sold downriver for learning to read.
Wow.
He would play school with his owner's son, and he would say, okay, Tommy, you be the teacher, I'll be you, let's go over the lessons, and I'll let you be charged. And kind of through this subterfuge learned to read. When the owners found out about that, he was sold downriver, and that meant, it was kind of a generic term in the South at the time for going further deeper south so you had less chance to escape. Later, in his later life, he was being trained to be a jockey. He was a very slightly built man, and he happened to be in Memphis when the Civil War broke out. When the Union troops came into that city, he put a bucket on his head, put some mud on his face, got in line with the Union troops, and marched right out of town with them.
Wow.
When his owner at the time tried to collect him at the Union camp, the Union soldiers became basically irate, beat him up, and threw him out of the camp. And he served with that unit for a year or so as a volunteer nurse, and that was the 44th Illinois Infantry Regiment. Later in 1863, he served with the U.S. Navy. He was a steward on a river gunboat. Very important job. The river gunboats were to interdict shipping for the South, and they kind of choke off their economy. Later, he ran the commissary for the Navy after the war, and he founded 2 successful restaurants in Louisville, Kentucky. Wow. He was quite the restaurateur. He founded those with his brother. Okay. Later, he got the call to go into the ministry. He was a very active Republican. He got a doctorate in theology. He went to the same seminary as Booker T. Washington, and they were contemporaries. They would write back and forth.
Oh, my goodness.
When he found out that the chaplain for the 24th Infantry was going to retire, which that regiment was created in 1866 with 3 others, and they were the only regiments that really have the moniker Buffalo Soldier because they were created after the Civil War, and that was the 24th and 25th Infantry and the 9th and 10th Cavalry. The 24th was the last black unit to desegregate and did so in Korea in 1950 under combat conditions. Very, very difficult. After he got his appointment as a chaplain of the 24th, he was commissioned as a captain. He served with distinction all over the South, in the West, the Apache Indian Wars. His unit fought in the Spanish-American War, and were in Cuba. He stayed behind to recruit replacements, because at the time, every regiment was responsible for recruiting their own replacements. Very difficult job if your unit's seeing a lot of combat, to convince people to go.
Exactly.
Later, he served with his unit again in the Philippines. And while they were going over to the Philippines, and the unit had been in the Philippines once before that, and this is right around 1904, 1905, he gets injured, not through combat, but as a chaplain. He was carrying the mail. He was going to go get the mail. Horse got away from him. He had to jump clear of the cart, and he dislocated his knee. So he said, okay, I need some time to recover. He gets onto the ship, heads back to Angel Island. If you ever go to Angel Island State Park, there's a small chapel there that Colonel Allensworth helped build. Kind of a side story, but on the ship ride back, he falls and breaks his knee, fractures his kneecap. So he's okay, I'm done. He puts in his papers for retirement. He goes through that process, and the Army promotes him to lieutenant colonel. And it's very common at this time period, it still is in some cases, when the military would bump you one rank, just take that higher rank into your retirement. So he probably only wore the title or the silver oak leaves for a little while, maybe a few weeks before he retired as lieutenant colonel. He then retires to Los Angeles, California, where he meets Professor William Payne, Mr. Dotson, Mr. O'Vare, and several other men. They get together and form the California Home Promoting Association, which leads to the founding of Allensworth in 1908.
Wow.
And then he goes on, and he goes around the country, he speaks, he's recruiting people, because town doesn't just spring up overnight.
No.
It has to be thought out and planned. Now, there's not a lot of government red tape to get in the way. But you still got to convince people, hey, this is the place to be. Invest your money here, because there's no social safety net. So he recruits businessmen, entrepreneurs, and the idea is that African Americans could come here, be gentlemen farmers, eat their own produce. One of his selling points was you can go out your front door and pick oranges off of your own tree. And it's quite the selling point, because remember, the American dream at this point is owning land, owning a business, owning a home. And his fundamental belief was we were physically free, but we're not economically or culturally free. Let's do it on our own. So he finds land here in Tulare County, which is in the part of the old Tulare Lake Basin, so it's land's very cheap. It's next to the rail station, or a rail point, commercial rail stop, which makes it very accessible. Awesome. This is before cars are very common. Cars at this point are still kind of the purview of the rich. Still kind of considered a toy until later in 1908, Henry Ford releases the Model T. That starts to change things.
Okay.
But he goes on with the founding of the town. It starts off really quite good in the beginning years. There are 4 things that happen kind of within the space of about 18 to 24 months that lead to the town's demise. One of them is the drought. Okay. California enters one of its worst droughts on record in that 1913, 1914 period. It's only been surpassed by this last year. The railroad moves the commercial rail stop from Allensworth to the town of Alpha. There's a single donor that pays for that spur line to be put in. It's very suspect, of course, but that happens in business. The colonel's then killed in an accident in Monrovia, California. As he gets off a trolley car, he's struck by a motorcyclist and is killed. Not instantly, but he lingers for several days. He was in his 70s. He was about 76 years old at the time. Highly suspect. I don't know that they were trying to hurt him. I think it had something to do with the water rights. Okay. We can't prove it either way. I'm sure it was an intentional accident, but not like an intentional murder. And then they lose their bid to build a black college here. They're going to build a black polytechnical college here on the grounds that is Allensworth today. And when the colonel dies, he's the guy with all the political connections, the moxie, if you want to say that. Knows the ins and outs. Is a very charismatic leader, very well educated, very good speaker. The bill dies in the California Assembly. Nothing more is ever heard again. Those four things, had they happened over a 10-year period, probably would have been survivable. But in that short of time period, it was blow after blow to the town. By 1918, the die is cast. The town population starts a downward curve. The children are moving away. And again, World War I's happening at this time, so there's over 400,000 African Americans in uniform. There's jobs available in Richmond, California, in the shipyards. There's jobs available in Los Angeles in the textile and munitions business. So the kids are moving away and they're not coming back. And then by 1918, even Professor William Payne, the first teacher here, decides it's time to pull up stakes. I can't support my family on the number of students we have. And he actually gets a job as a principal in another location. The town does hang on. We call it the town that refused to die because there were still people living in Allensworth. There's still people living in the modern town of Allensworth. They're living within what is today the park boundaries until 1972. The park was declared a park in 1974. We are entered on the National Register of Historic Places as a historic district. Right around 1974, 76. We just recently, in 2012, became a California historical landmark. And that adds to the protection. And like I said, we're formally listed on the National Register of Historic Places, which makes us protect the park in certain ways, in certain manners. Like if one of my staff has to go out and replace a sign, I have to do a review and make sure that we're not disturbing anything that's important. And that aids to the protection of this landmark and these buildings that we see. All these are house museums. They're all furnished as close as we can to what was appropriate to the time period and based on what we know from oral interviews, historical documents, as well as common things of the era. If someone were to portray you 100 years from now, they would know you would have sunglasses, but they may not know the right kind. They would know that you had a cell phone, but they would not necessarily know you had an Apple. It's those little nuances we try and get as much as possible. We go over photographs, very fine-tooth comb, and where we triangulate historical record, historical photograph, things common to the era, then we know we're on safe ground.
All right. Steve has told us quite a bit about Colonel Allensworth. It's been my privilege and pleasure to meet him, and I just can't wait to get on to our next stop. So until next time, God bless you. Before you go, Steve, you told me about one of Colonel Allensworth's favorite sayings about leadership.
Yes, and actually it was echoed by our former director, Major General Anthony Jackson. Leaders eat last.
Leaders eat last. See you next time. Bye-bye.